My partner of 13 years left me 2 weeks ago. She is not communicating about the separation or coparenting our kids. My now former partner and I had been together for 13 years. We were not legally married but treated our relationship similar to marriage. We have a shared bank account, 2 elementary school-aged children, a dog, 2 cars we shared, and a house in both of our names. My partner told me last year she was thinking of leaving me, which caught me by surprise, and when I asked why she said she didn't know. She has a history of avoidant behavior and not being able to talk in conflict. This became more extreme over the past year as she stopped talking to me for long periods of time, avoided being in proximity with me, and when I continued to ask questions about why she wanted to leave, she ignored me or complained that I was too anxious. My partner has also been dealing with depression since both of our kids started school fall of 22, and she had a part-time job that had been fulfilling in the past, but around the same time she began to hate it. I encouraged her to make some new friends, go to therapy more, and start looking for a new job. I took on all of the household and childcare responsibilities while she worked on finding herself. She found a new temporary summer job working outdoors last year where she made a new male friend, I'll call Steve, that she started spending a lot of time with. Also during the summer, she told me that she lost her connection with our kids, did not miss them when they were away with her parents for a week, and didn't want to bring them back home. We started couples counseling last fall, but much of the time there she was unable to talk, only communicating with nods. Sometimes it seemed like she was making improvements only to fall back into not speaking to me again. In January, she finally started taking medicine to deal with her depression, but then asked for a trial separation. She moved into a friend's guest room and originally agreed for the children to stay at home for school nights since it was just a trial and we didn't want to disrupt the kids. Since then, she has found a new interest in being a parent. I think because of her friends telling her this would look bad in court for custody. We have been very adamant that we wanted an amicable separation with 50-50 shared parenting if it came to that, so her mention of court was alarming. Before the separation started, she tried talking to the kids without me to explain the separation, something we explicitly agreed not to do. She then spent every week arguing with our couples therapist over her time with the kids. In the first week of the trial, she spent the night with Steve on a work trip and lied to me about it and about not wearing her ring. I had told her last fall about how I felt uncomfortable with their relationship as she was talking and spending more time with this other guy than me. On the 3rd week of what was to be an 8-week trial separation, she ended things for good. When I asked her why, she said because I made her nerves feel bad and she felt better when she was away from me. When I asked for clarification of what that meant, she said she didn't feel emotionally safe with me, and when I asked why, she said for a lot of little reasons I couldn't change. In the 2.5 weeks since this day, she has not dealt with the shared parenting agreement I wrote up to give each other even 50-50 custody of the kids. This was important to me as the state we are in considers an unmarried mother the sole custodial guardian of the children, even if I'm their father on their birth certificates. She's also ignored many of my calls and texts when attempting to discuss our plans with the kids, how we swap them, and what things they need with them. Most of our interactions now devolve into arguments we rarely argued before, and it feels like she's deliberately misunderstanding me, like forgetting when the time is to swap the kids. I had been hoping to schedule another time with a couples counselor to help us work out how to explain the separation to the children, but she is unwilling to adjust her schedule and is delaying. Then last week she showed up at our house unannounced during one of the available times for counseling with Steve, her new guy. They said they were there to dig up some flowers from our land so she could move them to his place. I was upset as we had agreed to notify each other when we were going to each other's places, and this wasn't the first time she showed up without notifying me. I told them they needed to contact me first and that they had to leave. They argued with me for a while. Her name is on the deed, so legally she can be there. It's just not the right thing to do. Then Steve asked me if they didn't leave if I'd come beat him up. A weird escalation while they both held a shovel and pickaxe, and I was alone and unarmed. They also had parked me in the driveway so I couldn't have left. Eventually they left. I kept my distance and locked the doors. I felt panicked at the time and still feel unsafe in my home. When I called the counseling agency to tell them my partner couldn't make the times they were holding available for us that week, they asked about rescheduling. I told them about the incident, and they recommended I hold off on counseling and get a lawyer and guardian ad litem for our children. I filed for custody last week. I don't want our children to not have their mom, but I don't know how co-parenting in this situation is possible. I had wanted to wait to tell our children about the separation so my ex and I could do it together in a way we agreed on to minimize their trauma. I don't know if that's possible anymore or what I should do. I'm worried that taking legal action will alienate me from our small community as people take sides, and that people won't believe that a man larger than his former spouse could be subject to emotional abuse and potential physical harm by a smaller woman. You can't be worried about what other people think if you take legal action. Tell family and friends exactly what is going on and lawyer up to try to get custody. It's clear your ex is not in a good space right now. Protect your kids and yourself. Document and record everything. Stop worrying about being fair. Your children are the innocent victims in this war zone. Am I the antagonist for telling my mom that she is obsessed with my ex and needs to back off? For some background, I, 23 years old female, Dated my ex, 22 years old male, for about 4 years. We were friends before getting into a relationship and broke up due to him realizing he is gay. We are still really close friends and love each other very much, just not in the way we used to. We currently live together, signed a lease before breaking up, and agreed that with our history and compatibility as friends we would continue to live together in a 2-bedroom until we both feel ready to move to different places. My mom, 62 years old female, has never liked my ex. She blames him for a lot of the issues she and I had in our relationship. She hates that he and I are still living together and wants me to move out as soon as possible, whether that be me moving back home or finding my own place. We have had this same conversation multiple times, but it never gets through her head that I am happy where I am at. In an effort to repair our strained relationship, we try to meet up and hang out once a week. Lately, it has become a huge issue where I will try to update her on what is going on in my life, and she finds some way to bring it back to my ex. I could be talking to her about work, and suddenly she will ask, "Oh, is still at his job?" Or I will tell her about a tattoo I want to get, and she will be like, "The tattoo isn't influenced by X, right?" It is not just once or twice either, it is nearly constant. I can't get through a conversation without her somehow bringing up my ex, whether that be talking down on him or telling me about how I need to move on with my life. This all came to a head last week. I had a really good week and had a lot of good stuff going on that I was excited to tell her about. So I start by telling her that I have been doing really well and am about to go into my news when she cuts me off and asks, "This happiness isn't because of X, right?" I'll be honest, I kind of blew up on her. I told her that I was tired of every aspect of my life lately being defined by my ex, and it felt like she was obsessed with him. I told her it was ridiculous that my joy and accomplishments in life have been reduced in her eyes to having to do with my ex in some way, shape, or form. I ended the conversation by telling her that she can either find it in herself to stop caring about every little thing my ex was doing, or she can stay out of my life. I left the restaurant at that point because I was sick of the whole thing. My dad called me later that night and yelled at me for what I had said. He called me an asshole and told me to apologize to my mom since she was just trying to look out for me and make sure I wasn't still hung up on the guy. She doesn't want me to be taken advantage of and that I should be grateful that she was there for me. I do feel bad for losing my temper and all, but it feels like it was the only way to get through to my mom. Am I the asshole? Not the antagonist. Your mom was being an ass and your dad was the hat she wore. You and your ex had enough maturity and respect for each other to remain good friends, and that should be applauded, not criticized. This is actually an easy solution, but a challenge to implement. Get into the habit of just politely excusing yourself, standing up, and leaving whenever she brings it up. If you just don't listen and withdraw your presence, she'll get the picture. No need to have any discussions about the issue. She enjoys those and gets to tell you her opinion. But if you are disciplined and not get angry, it works. Am I the antagonist for asking my mother to leave because she won't stop wasting my food? My younger sister just had a baby and our mother came to help. My sister and her husband live in a tiny apartment with no room for our mother. I agreed to let her stay with me since I live only 8 blocks away. It's walkable. My plan was to Uber her over in the morning and pick her up after work. I only eat 1 meal a day during the week. Supper, hot or nice. I have coffee for breakfast and some fruit for lunch. On Saturday, I treat myself to a good breakfast, and on Sundays, I take the woman I'm dating for brunch. My mother decided that this was unacceptable. She got up early and went through my fridge and freezer to make me breakfast. I told her that I appreciate it, but that I do not usually eat breakfast. She said that was stupid. I very clearly communicated to her that she was welcome to eat anything in my home, but to please not make me breakfast as it was a waste. She made breakfast the following day. I walked out without eating it. I figured worst case scenario I could eat it for supper. She threw it out since I didn't eat it. I told her once more to please not waste my food. She made breakfast for me the next day. I asked her if she was developing dementia. She is wasting my food for no good reason. I'm not poor or anything, but wasting food is a pet peeve of mine. She said I was being ungrateful for her help, and she was doing it to be nice since I was letting her stay with me. I explained to her again that I did not need, want, require, or desire breakfast during the week. She said she understood. She made me breakfast the next day. I had had enough. I took her luggage with me when I dropped her off at my sister's home. I told my doorman that my guest was no longer welcome. I got so many messages from her and my sister all day long. Even my father called me to ask me to change my mind. I said no. He had to drive up and rent an Airbnb close to my sister because my mother was too scared to stay by herself. He's retired so he didn't miss work or anything. My sister came over alone to talk to me. She said I was being a complete ass and that I could afford the food my mother was wasting. I said I could, but that I didn't want to. She literally used up 2 months worth of my food. She made up huge breakfasts that I didn't even eat. I keep all my bacon in individual servings. She thought out 3 for every breakfast, 1 for her and 2 for me, and I ate 0. My father has asked me to let her back in. I said I would under the condition that she understand that my food is completely off limits to her. She can pay for her own food. I said I would make room in the fridge and freezer for her. She said I was being ridiculous and petty, So my father is staying neutral, but my mother and sister think I'm a jackass. My girlfriend thinks the whole thing is hilarious and refuses to get involved. Not the antagonist. It sounds like your mother was initiating a power play and would have continued wasting your food until you capitulated. People tend to take the easier route, and asking a reasonable person to capitulate is much easier than asking an unreasonable person to be reasonable. 3 unwanted and uneaten breakfasts later, it's clear that she was not listening and trying to exert her will on you. My mother sulks at me and it makes me feel guilty. How do I stop this? I'm 25 years old, male, and have 2 parents who are still married. I had a relatively peaceful childhood, but I think I suffer from my parents' dysfunctional parenting style. In fact, I think I have 2 emotionally immature parents. Today's message is about my mother's parenting style. She's about to turn 60 years old and we're relatively close to each other. I'm a university student in a demanding program that requires me to cut down on social events. As for my mother, she's always wanted to put her children first, which is why she's remained a stay-at-home mom, which I loved. On the other hand, I think she has prioritized her children too much to the detriment of her personal growth. She wants to hear from me at least once a week by phone and see me as often as possible. Since I live 2 hours from her home, I can't go and see her very often, once a month or every 2 months. On several occasions, she blamed me for distancing myself from her, when in reality I didn't even have time for myself, and hardly any time to eat. I've had a good talk with her so that she understands that I'm doing my best and that she also needs to think about herself and develop her interests to stop waiting for her children's attention. I'm not a child who necessarily wants to see my parents often. I'm quite independent, and I've never felt that I could rely on my parents to help me in difficult situations. When I was a child, I found myself alone with my problems because when I spoke to my parents about them, my father wouldn't listen to me or my mother seemed to trivialize the situation. So I grew up, and with age I simply learned to rely on myself. So today I don't think of calling them to tell them about my day or to talk about myself, because they never let me do that when I was young. So when I call them, I find myself in a listening situation, like a psychologist listening to his client, which I don't feel like doing after my day. Because of this, I'm criticized for not sharing my life with them or calling them often enough. But when I do, my father continues not to listen to me and only talks about himself, and my mother doesn't seem so interested or understanding of my events that I share with her. This week was my college break. My mother knew this and hoped I would come to see her during my vacation. I preferred to see my childhood friend, whom I hadn't seen for several months, so as not to lose sight of him. On top of that, due to financial difficulties, I had to work. I wrote a message to my mother yesterday. I think she's sulking. She's online and doesn't reply to non-messages, which is contrary to her habit. She tends to reply as soon as she receives a message. When she was young, she used to make me feel guilty by sulking for several days, even 1 week, because of some behavior that might have hurt her that I didn't know about. I already explained to her that I preferred her to name her emotions instead of sulking. Even now, I feel she's manipulating me in this way, in order to give her attention and affection. I don't know how to get rid of this feeling of guilt. Have you been in a situation like mine? What to do about it? You've done enough to try and explain your situation. Just like you explained yourself here, you can send her a message why you don't share your day-to-day life with her and why you can't come. Tell her she's a grown woman, so you hope she understands your commitments. It's time for you to live your life. Am I the antagonist for not wanting to live around poor people? My wife, 28 female, and I, 28 male, have been married 3 years and together for 10. We got our first apartment together when we were 19 in an okay neighborhood. It was a cheap but nice place between our respective universities. After a year, we purchased a condominium in a somewhat rough neighborhood. The condominium was in the second poorest neighborhood in a city that was known for being a bit rundown. However, the city was undergoing a large revitalization project, and the neighborhood significantly cleaned up during the 7 years we lived there. We eventually listed the condominium for sale so we could purchase a house with a yard, and we received an all-cash offer on the condominium in less than 24 hours, and we sold it for $200,000, more than what we had purchased it for. My wife and I found an absolutely beautiful house in a relatively poor neighborhood. We figured that since we already spent 7 years living in a rough neighborhood and were totally fine, we would rather get more for our money in a less ideal neighborhood than get a tiny house in a more well-off town, especially since we don't have children. Long story short, we bought the house and I absolutely despise the neighborhood and our neighbors. My direct neighbors blare music all day, until like 2 a.m. And it's not even just the music that's annoying, there's so much bass that I can often feel the music in our house. They litter constantly. I have watched them dump junk out their window as it blows all down the street. Another neighbor is constantly getting in screaming matches with their significant other. They don't secure their trash, so it is constantly blowing into our yard. I've essentially given up trying to keep up with it as there is always more every single day. They let their cats and dogs wander around the neighborhood off-leash. We recently got berated by one of our neighbors when their dog ran into our yard and attacked our dog, and our dog ended up biting theirs. There are plenty more things I could complain about, and there are absolutely some positives about the neighborhood too. But it has reached the point where I want to move to a nicer, more well-off neighborhood. When I was explaining my reasoning to my wife, she called me classist and told me to not be an asshole. She said she already feels bad for contributing to the gentrification of the neighborhood, and that not wanting to be around poor people makes me an asshole. I have nothing against poor people. I don't even blame them for these things. I'm sure they have too much already going on to care about their trash getting blown away, etc. However, I'm at the point in my life where I just want to have a nice house with a cute lawn and not have to worry about whether my neighbor's dog is out. It always is. My neighbor's dumping trash everywhere or having music blasting all night. Not the antagonist for wanting to move because of inconsiderate neighbors. However, you're the antagonist for blaming their behavior on being poor. Bad behavior does not depend on economic status. Focus on the behavior, not the income level. Consider moving to a neighborhood with strict HOA or better code enforcement instead of generalizing based on income levels. Am I the antagonist for refusing to let my parents see my daughter? I, 27 years old female, have not been back to see my family for nearly 6 years. I don't have as much against my mom personally, and my issue is mostly with my father. But my mom can't seem to stand up to him and does whatever he wants. So I don't want to interact with her out of frustration that she won't change. My father did not believe me when I was younger and thought I was making up my pain. I have been having issues with extreme pain around my period since they started. He prevented me from getting appointments with specialist doctors because it would cost co-payments. We were not well off, but my brother got karate and swimming classes and I was told to suck it up. We were traveling for vacation when I had so much pain in my abdomen, I was screaming, and they wanted to turn around the plane. My father was yelling at me to be quiet and said I was making him look bad. He was telling the flight attendants I was fine and just to keep flying. I was brought to a hospital when we landed, but my dad spent the whole time complaining loudly. I was ruining his vacation. It turned out to be ovarian torsion, and I needed surgery. He refused to get me real help because we went to a doctor once and they told me it was in my head, and he agreed and refused to take me again, no matter how much I was in pain. He kept telling me I was just attention-seeking and then yelled at me for not getting into a good college, which I couldn't because I was too debilitated to study half the month. It wasn't until I got on insurance through work I started to really look into what was wrong. It took a few years, but I finally got exploratory surgery, and they concluded it was endometriosis. I was so relieved I cried and felt so much weight off my shoulders knowing finally what was wrong. Obviously, with endometriosis came fertility issues. It took 3 miscarriages and 4 years and surgery to have my daughter. My dad in front of me told my husband he wouldn't blame him if he divorced me because I couldn't give him a child. I screamed at him and cried, and he made it seem like it wasn't a big deal for him to say because everyone was expecting it. Now my daughter is 4, and my parents haven't met her yet and are always trying different numbers to get me to pick up. He has now started bothering my husband, and I picked up and yelled at him for ignoring my pain and telling my husband to divorce me for not getting pregnant. He defended himself by saying he doesn't know how female issues work and he didn't think I had a real issue. And his defense for what he said to my husband was because he didn't want my husband to feel bad about leaving when I kept having miscarriages. I hung up fuming, and my mom is now calling and texting and is asking that I forgive my father. Not the antagonist. If it were me, I would not allow such a toxic and harmful influence around my child. It sounds like you have been through a lot and deserve better. Stand your ground and protect your daughter from their negative behaviors. You are absolutely in the right here. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist in the description.